Okay, welcome to one of the first paper sessions of ISMAR 24. I'm glad that you've chosen Perception 1 to visit. Thank you. We appreciate that. I'm Joe Gabbard from Virginia Tech, and I'm simply here to introduce speakers. So let's get right to it. First up, we have Fu-Chia from Purdue, who's going to talk a little bit about virtual agents. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, hi everyone. I'm Fu-Chia Yang. You can also call me Kelly Yang. Today I'm going to talk about our work on the effects of depth of knowledge of virtual agents. And it's done by me, Kevin Duque, and Christos, my professor at Purdue University. All right, a little overview of our project. So in this project, we explored the impact of depth of knowledge for LLM-powered, a large language model-powered conversational virtual agent towards several different human perceptions in virtual reality environments. We chose game development as the domain knowledge for this project, just as the simplicity of the focus of our program in Purdue CGT. So a bit of background and motivation. So with the ongoing and prospering large language model and neural language processing technologies, we've seen a lot of use cases through conversational virtual agents. However, there's the subtle complexity of how humans interact with virtual agents in VR environment have not yet been fully discovered. So our study aimed to understand the perceived knowledge of virtual agents through dynamic conversational interactions in VR. In this project, we provide a detailed walkthrough of our system implementation, how we use prompt engineering with LLM to design and create 3 distinct depth of knowledge levels of the virtual agents. And we also walk through our user study procedure, and we provide a set of design guidelines for future development for conversational virtual agents based on the study results. So we categorize our research questions into 3 main categories. The first is understanding how depth of knowledge will affect perceived knowledge and perceived intelligence. And as for perceived knowledge, we break it down into the overall perceived knowledge and specific perceived knowledge in the domain of game development, which will include game history, game development, and industry trends of the virtual agents. The second category is the perception of LLM-based conversational virtual agents. So we try to answer to the question of whether or not depth of knowledge of the virtual agent will affect co-presence, report, factuality, and uncanny valley effect, anthropomorphism, and willingness for future interaction with the virtual agents. The last category is we collected different quantitative data through the application, and we try to answer whether or not depth of knowledge will impact users' response content, users' response word count, and response time for the conversational interaction. Here is the spec of our implementation. We use game engine. We use the Unity game engine, and the whole system is running on the Meta Quest 2 head-mount device. And we use the OpenAI ChatGPT 40613 model for this application that we tested with our participants. And as for the speech-to-text and text-to-speech API, we utilize the Microsoft Azure API. For the 3D character, we use one of the character from the Microsoft Rocketbox library. And for the character animation, we use the Mixamo animation with cell-side eye gaze and lip syncs. Here is our some of the screenshots from the VR environment. We try to recreate a virtual environment with a situating scene where a participant is conversing with a game development professor in her office hour. And we provided a set of health questions as conversational starters for the participants. And this is remained the same throughout the 3 distinct conditions, which I will talk about in this slide. So we utilize prompt engineering to build different levels of depth of knowledge and make those as our experimental conditions. So we set the same base prompt, basically instruction of how the agent should be interacting with the participants. And as for the knowledge base, We provide different instruction. For the low depth of knowledge, we mentioned that, you only know general knowledge toward game development. For medium depth of knowledge, which is the second experimental condition, we set the virtual agents to know more about game history. And for the last condition, the agent will know more about not only the game history, but also the game development tools, process, and also the game development industry. And we also provide a different set of knowledge bank, basically just put it into prompts. So these are different sets of knowledge bank that we got from the internet as well. So it's just a picture of it. And I'm showing some of the video as demonstration. This is the low depth of knowledge condition. I don't think the sound is coming through. But basically what's happening in this video is the agent is replying to the participant's question, asking whether or not you can tell me about the game history. And since it's in low depth knowledge condition, the agent replied that she doesn't know much about it. And so, for medium depth knowledge, she replied with a set of responses related to game history, but she doesn't know anything about game development tools. And then for high depth of knowledge, she provided a lot of information on game engines and tools used for game development process. Yeah, sorry about the video not showing the sounds. So for ratings and measurements, we collected different sets of measurements based on prior research and developed metrics. And here I just listed out as a set. And for application log data, we collected the response transcript, word counts, and response time. And we also collected qualitative feedback from the participants. So for our participants, we have 27 participants in total, 17 male and 10 female. And age mean around 25 years old. We also asked about their prior experience interacting with conversational agents, and also their prior VR experience. And this is a pipeline of our study procedure. We are running a within subject study with 3 different conditions, and after each conditions, we ask them to fill in the survey. All the participants are run under the Latin square ordering throughout the study. And after all conditions are finished, we ask for the open-ended feedback as our qualitative result. And here is the results from the self-reported ratings. As you can see, the first category where we ask, where we try to understand their perceived knowledge, specific perceived knowledge, and perceived intelligence. There are statistically significant results. We ran the Sharp-Wheel test on the 5% level, and we analyzed our data using one-way repeated measure ANOVA throughout the study, and also we use the post-hoc buffer-only corrections for the pairwise comparisons. So as you can see, the only one self-reported rating that doesn't have any statistically significant results is the co-presence. Yeah. For detail of the ratings, you can check out our paper. And we also analyze the pairwise, the Pearson correlation coefficients throughout all these ratings. The only measurements that doesn't have correlations with other measurements is still the co-presence, as you can see from here. The red is having strong correlation, green are moderate correlation. Okay. So here is the result for our user response transcript. We did content analysis and did categorizations through all user responses, and we categorize them into domain knowledge related. So if it's related to game design, it will be put in that category. And if it's agent related responses or questions, then it will be in AR categorization like that's AR. And then if it's general knowledge related responses, GR, and others are responses that doesn't really fit into any of the above categorization. And as you can see from the bar chart, our participants tend to ask more agent-related and general knowledge-related responses when the agent have lower depth of knowledge. So from some of our participants' feedback, we noticed that they tried to test out the system when they couldn't really get in the flow of discussing game development related topics. So that asked more about the agent related responses and general questions. And there was no significant results for both word counts and response time. So summary up and providing answers to our previous research questions, our participants are in fact able to distinguish different levels of depth of knowledge when conversing with this kind of virtual agent. And they can also identify specific domain depth of knowledge. And at the same time, there's correlation with, between perceived knowledge and perceived intelligence. And as for all other perceptions that we collected, the only one that doesn't have significant result is the co-presence ratings, and which we think that because as like a dynamic interaction, a conversational interaction itself already provide a really strong sense of co-presence. And for the conversational interaction, as I mentioned a little bit before, the participants tend to ask more agent-related and general knowledge-related when they notice that the agent has like lower depth of knowledge, and there's no significant results on word count and response time. So we provided some design guidelines based on our results and also participants' responses. So first, if we try to develop and design for conversational virtual agents, the very first guideline that we provided is that we need to make sure and ensure the congruence between the agent's persona and domain expertise, because we noticed that some participants mentioned that there's like a misalignment in the low depth of knowledge condition, whereas the agent is actually portrayed as a game development professor, but not really have that depth of knowledge corresponding to its persona. And then the second is it will be very beneficial to develop a certain general knowledge for the virtual agent. So the virtual agent have like a broad repository of general knowledge that enables a wide range of inquiries and responses, which will achieve higher realness and believability. And the third is to expand persona knowledge. This includes like information such as agent's name, age, occupation, location, those kind of information. And this will reinforce the identity, and it will enhance the believability of users' perceptions as well. Next is to implement realistic character animation. So using high realistic animation for virtual agents really plays a vital role in this kind of application and will enhance the naturalness. And for the last design guideline, it will be essential to incorporate human-like verbal cues, such as natural pauses, annotation changes, emotion-inflected speech. This will also enhance the overall anthropomorphism and establish rapport interacting with conversational agents. There are certain limitations for our project. Using LLM, the content might have timely issues, and also there are certain challenges on designing the accurate prompt. And also for dynamic conversation, it's really difficult to control in this user study, this kind of user studies. And also there are certain response delays that we observe in our application due to API latencies. And also conversational gesture animation were not our focus, so it might read as unnatural for some of the participants. And also lastly, participants were monitored throughout the experiment, so there might be a certain extent of experimental proxy for the results. And just to sum up, participants can distinguish between different knowledge levels of the virtual agent through conversational interaction. And agent's depth of knowledge can significantly impact participants' perception toward intelligence, report, factuality, uncanny valley effect, anthropomorphism, and their willingness for future interaction. And we also found strong correlations between perceived knowledge, perceived intelligence, factuality, and willingness for future interactions as well. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fu-Chia. We have time for maybe one or two questions, depending upon the questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll run this mic right to you. There has to be a question. question. Come on, y'all.
Any questions?
No questions. Oh, great. Thank you. And please state your name and affiliation before asking your question.
Okay, so this is Hsin-Ni from Kyushu University, Japan. So I just wonder if you have, when you design the avatar, do you have any special consideration about the look, the overall look of the avatar?
Second question, perhaps. Second question. Maybe you want to call the technician. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Francesco, how are things going up here?
Not too bad. Could be
Okay.
better. We're ready to show the slides potentially. Otherwise, I present without slides.
Yeah. Oh no. So yeah.
Just
Good,
need a
you're-
good effort of imagination, but
It's just checking the connections.
Hmm?
Just checking the connections.
okay.
Can you check your HDMI?
I mean, I think it.
Just check.
Yeah. There's people behind. No? I mean, there is stuff happening because. Classic.
Can you see the displays
Hmm?
on the display?
Yeah. Pretty fresh, huh?
Switch the ordering and move. Maybe.
Like I go after the next one. Okay.
We can switch the order of presenters and then move that presentation to. Yeah.
I can. Maybe this one? Yeah, let's go. Thank you. Let's see. Yeah, very true. But no, this we don't need. Oh, I see something, yeah. Okay, sure. Okay, maybe let's try the last round, but then I think it's fine to move to the next one, maybe, if it takes a bit. No.
No, they can switch it from this slide to the to here once they see a signal.
Do you know what the other person used as an input? HDMI?
Yeah.
It's just not working. We're still not seeing this. Okay. Great. Let's switch up.
Yeah, okay.
So excuse us all. We have obviously a technical problem, so we're going to switch the speaker order. Surprise. So next up would be you're fourth. Where's our third speaker? Yes. Thank you. All the way back there. Okay. Let's see if your computer will work.
I hope so. No worries.
Okay. If anybody knows any good stories, this would be a good time to share them. I know, right? This is my job. So I have a story. My first VR conference was, it started in, it has a 9 in it, let me just say that. I was a master's student, and I had presented my work on a taxonomy of usability characteristics in virtual environments. That was not my idea, it was my advisor's idea. I just did the work. And you have to understand that the conference community back then was understandably and intentionally heavily technology driven, right? We needed to solve a lot of technological problems. My advisor and I were looking at the UX problems, and I was very nervous, right, when I gave the talk to a quite large audience. And Fred Brooks, who maybe some of you know very well and some of you have heard of, was in the audience, and my advisor remembers this. I don't, because I probably was, blind from fear. Stood up and said, this is the most important talk I've heard at the conference this week. And I don't say that to brag about myself at all, seriously. But really what I'm trying to say is that because of his comment, I believe our paper was voted best paper or best presentation. And it just goes to show you that as a presenter for all you all, you never know how your work might impact an individual in the audience, and how their response may then impact you in return. And so I was always grateful for Fred's comment. Whether or not it was true or not, from his perspective it was clearly, but whether or not it was the best paper is not really the story. The story is really about how individual interactions can really impact people. So don't be afraid to speak up and check in and interact. That's my story. That's all I got. Yeah.
Shall I go ahead?
We can.
All right.
Awesome.
So hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation of my research titled Visual Perceptual Confidence and Exploring Discrepancies Between Self-Reported and Actual Distance Perception in Virtual Reality. My name is Yahya Hmaiti, and I'm from the University of Central Florida, and I'm a first-year PhD student. So my talk outline was going to go as follows. So basically, I'm going to begin with a small background review. Then I'm going to expand on our research questions and objectives. Then I'm going to move on to our study design and methodology, and then results and discussion and implications. Yes. Yeah.
Opening session about the attendees and how, all of us, right? And who here how many folks are like 2/3 or first timers? Raise your hand if this is your first ISMAR. What? Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Fun fact. Who knows who would have guessed that, okay, there was a reference in the opening ceremony for those who were there to the precursor to ISMAR, which was called, anyone, Bueller? ISAR? Does anyone know the folks that were kind of spearheading that conference at the time? A handful of people, right? So, because of course, right? one of which I think is important to mention. And I did not know this until about maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It just didn't register with me. One of them is Gudrun Klinker. Think about that. In 1998, in the field of computer science, someone, an underrepresented person stepping up into the limelight and making something happen like that. It's quite incredible, really, if you think about it. So, and I think I saw Gudrun was in line to, ask a question earlier today, my eyes were not deceiving me. So if you have a chance to meet her, thank her for her early work getting the conference community started. Anyone else have any fun ISMAR facts? I know there's people in here that know them. Janine, Janine, you can help me by grabbing a mic. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Nice.
I've had students ask me if the questions from the community were going to be very difficult, right? Like intimidatingly difficult. And what I like to share with the students that I work with is that I believe, and I truly do, and at both ISMAR and the IEEE VR conference, that we have a very supportive community, right? So yes, there can be difficult questions, but they're not going to be phrased in a way that's aggressive or condescending. So if you see that, tell me, and I will go have a chat with them. Ho, huzzah! Great. I will now yield the floor. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, hi again. My name is Yahya Hmaiti, and I'm from the University of Central Florida, and I'm a first-year PhD student, and I'm going to be presenting my research project titled Visual Perceptual Confidence, Exploring Discrepancies Between Self-Reported and Actual Distance Perception in VR. So my talk outline is as follows. I'm going to begin with a background, then I'm going to move on to the research questions and objectives, and then I'm going to expand on our study design, then the results, discussion and implications, and then limitations and future work. So VR is no longer a distant concept, but it's a tangible reality that is accessible to the masses. And the increasing use of VR requires an accurate representation of the virtual environments. And one of the aspects of an accurate representation is having accurate egocentric distance perception. So several investigations in the span of the last 3 decades show that distances tend to be underestimated in head-mounted displays. And researchers tried essentially to find what are the factors that influence this phenomenon and also come up with solutions to it. However, up to this day, there isn't a final solution to this problem. And amongst the means that were used to reduce distance underestimation, we can find increasing the number of objects in the virtual environment using techniques such as full avatar embodiments of users, using head-centric rest frames, and also, for example, adjusting the horizon and camera placement, increasing the quality of the graphics, and so on. And our research essentially differs from prior work as we don't want to focus on objective performance only. We want to go back and also include the self-perceived performance of users because we question, do users know while they're performing the task that they're underestimating distance? What are the conditions that they think help them be more accurate at judging distances? And we also want to compare the user's perceived distance judgment performance with their actual performance at the end. And our main contributions essentially consist in a within-subject experiment where we varied visual complexity, target distance, and the environment type. And we also have empirical evidence that shows the existence of a discrepancy between these self-perceived performance results with objective performance in a blind walk-in task in VR. And lastly, we designed an open source virtual environment test bed that could be used in the future in spatial judgment experiments. And this test bed is also available on our lab's website, and I'll have a link to it at the end. And essentially, the reviewed literature did not contain an experiment that assesses distance judgment with multiple factors at once. Usually, the existing work chooses one factor to evaluate with different target distances. So in our experiment, we chose visual complexity to represent the degree of detail, fidelity, density of objects, and also VE clutter combining all of these factors and varying them all at once. So when it comes to our study design, it was a within-subject experiment where the independent variables consisted in the environment type. We had one indoor environment and one outdoor environment, and we had 3 target distances, mainly in the action space, so 3 meters, 4.5 meters, and 6 meters. And lastly, the visual complexity was low complexity, mid complexity, and high complexity. And for the dependent variables, those mainly consisted in the results we collected. So we had the distance estimation error and also the post-study survey results. And all of this at the end resulted in 18 conditions in total that were repeated 3 times, which resulted in 54 counterbalanced trials at the end. And I would like to note that the results we collected were essentially grouped and averaged. We did not use absolute values because we wanted to keep the direction of the error, because some people might overestimate and other ones could underestimate. And here we have the design of our virtual environments. So every 3 VE models that we had were basically consistent and comparable, had consistent and comparable configuration and designs. So mainly what we followed is we came up at first with high complexity environments that were highly realistic, had multiple objects, and then we derived the lower quality versions of those environments to have a stable means of comparison and configuration. And in our manuscript, we outline the detail on the breakdown of the targets and all the specifics about the design of these environments. And here, I would like to show the outdoor environments as well, which followed the same design principles with low complexity, medium complexity, and high complexity. And now, this is the apparatus in our user study location. The head-mounted display we used was the Pimax 5K Plus, as it affords having a large FOV of 170 degrees by 110. And also, since participants needed to walk for very long distances, we chose to use an HPZ VR backpack and to deliver instructions using headphones, because we wanted to minimize our own interaction as researchers that comes from the external world with the person that is immersed in VR. And as well, our experiment ran with 80 to 90 frames per second, and we also adjusted the interpupillary distance for every participant. And this is the blind walk-in procedure. So it starts first with the look-in phase, where the user needs to locate the target within the environment, memorize the distance to it, and then whenever they're ready, they walk eyes closed to that distance. And then once they reach it, they stop, they inform the researcher, they open their eyes, and then they go back, walk into the starting position following guidance arrows. And here, we discuss the self-reported performance through the post-study survey. So essentially, participants had to rank the VE conditions based on where they felt most accurate at judging distance. And we provided every participant with a summary of our study because we wanted all participants to have the same understanding of the experiment. And the survey was given at the end to allow participants to compare all conditions accurately at once without having a change in comparison baseline. And at the same time, we focused on ranking rather than rating because we were much more concerned about relative judgments and not quantifying improvements. So when it comes to objective performance, participants, or actually we found made significant effects for the visual complexity, the environment type, and also the target distance. However, no significant effects were found for interactions. And to expand a little bit more on the significance that we found for visual complexity, we wanted to illustrate it using the following graph that shows the interactions of visual complexity with other factors in our experiment. And what we found is that the mid-complexity level was the one to cause this significance, as it had the most underestimation compared to low and high complexities, and low and high complexity did not have any significant differences between them. And here we have the qualitative data. So the majority of participants preferred environments that were indoors, and also a target distance that was short, so the 3-meter target distance. And also for the complexity, they preferred high complexity environments. And in terms of combination, they preferred high complexity indoors environments. So based on these results, we found that there is a discrepancy and at the same time an alignment of perception with objective results. So in terms of the environment type and also the target distance, the participants' self-perceived performance matched objective performance. So they were more accurate at the 3-meter distance and also indoors, whereas there was a discrepancy as participants thought they performed best with visual high complexity, whereas there was no objective difference between high complexity and low complexity. Now, we conducted a thematic analysis on participants' justifications to understand why they made the choices in the survey responses. So when it comes to choosing high complexity, this was motivated by having more realistic and clear virtual environments and more objects around that helped referencing the target. and also objects that were similar to real life. And lastly, because it had continuous details around the target and in the walking path towards the target. And for the target distance, they chose the 3-meter target distance because it required the least effort to go to, and it had the least distractions surrounding it. And at the same time, it gave them increased confidence because a lot of participants reported that they were scared to go to the longer target distances, afraid of physical obstacles, even though there were none in physical reality. And lastly, for indoors, participants preferred indoors as it had more reference objects in an enclosed area. And the fact that we chose an apartment room, having the walls around helped them reference dimensions better. And also indoors is an area where participants walk in real life daily. So they were more used to it. And next, in terms of the implications of our results, so the sole reliance on self-reported performance can be misleading, especially for tasks that require actual accurate distance judgment. And our results essentially guide the design of applications where self-perceived performance can be prioritized over objective performance. And this could be in applications such as rehab and therapy, mental health, entertainment, and also exploratory learning. However, in experiences where objective distance measurements matter more, then in that case, self-perceived performance can be reduced in terms of importance. And this would be applicable to applications such as military drills, training and simulation, digital twins, and also machinery training. And now moving on to the limitations of our work. So visual complexity as a definition is not standardized across the literature. So our definition was still subjective. And in the future, multiple factors could be added to this definition or removed. And for spatial perception questionnaires, there isn't a standard one across the literature on spatial judgment. So we came up with our own. And for real-world comparison, that is in our future work, as we would like to see if this discrepancy that we noticed in VR could be also generalized to real-world settings. And lastly, we want to experiment with larger target distances because we chose target distances in the action space. So experimenting with targets located at 30 meters and beyond would be something we look forward to experiment with. And for our direct future work, we're investigating the causes of discrepancies that we found, and also exploring feedback mechanisms to align perceived and actual performance. And lastly, we're currently developing a prediction model to predict from the user's view in VR the distance underestimation that could be expected. And in this study, so we explored the gap between self-perceived and actual performance in judging distances within VR. And most participants felt more confident about their accuracy in high complexity virtual environment to shorter target distances, for example, the 3-meter target distance, and also indoors. So particularly, mainly the target distance that they preferred was the 3 meters, and our objective results showed no significant differences in accuracy between high complexity and low complexity conditions. And lastly, relying solely on the self-perceived preferences can be misleading, so we provide design guidelines in our manuscript to show how to better design experiences where self-perceived performance could be prioritized compared to objective performance. And this marks the end of my presentation. And here's the QR code for the paper as well. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a coffee break after this session. That's 30 minutes long, so we won't, I won't necessarily try to get us right on schedule, but I will try not to cut too much into the coffee break. So we should take a question or two. Great, and please, reminder, name and affiliation.
Bernard Duque from Simon Fraser University. I might have missed it, but from what I understand, people walked back with eyes open to their starting location. Is that right? Couldn't they have used this to recalibrate, basically?
No, so they walked with eyes open basically to the starting position with the guidance arrow. However, the whole scene was dark and it was a circuitous path that took them back to the starting position.
Okay, good.
So
Yeah.
typically that wouldn't impact them memorizing the dimensions or like using it as reference, again, for next trials.
Okay, yeah, good. Yeah, I wasn't sure whether you did this part because that could, but yeah, super interesting work.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Thank you, really great talk. I'm wondering, how do you rule out the possibility that people always overestimate how long they work when they work with their eyes closed?
So in terms of overestimation, we only found that it was amongst 20% of participants. So it did not really change the fact that overall we had more distance underestimation than overestimation. Yeah, that's based on our results.
I'm wondering, have you also tried the experiment in real world? For example, when I'm looking like a target distance in the real world and I try to walk to there with my eyes closed, do I always get there or I also underestimate distance? So that's maybe not an effect of the VR, but the effect of how precise I'm able to walk with my eyes closed.
Yeah, so we have experimented with the real world condition in our future work. However, based on prior work, it seems that there is distance underestimation as well in real world as well.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, let's thank our speaker. Okay, we're going to try this again. We have Francesco from LMU Munich. Hopefully going to be talking about visual search tasks across augmented virtuality, which you don't see a lot of talks on augmented virtuality, right? And augmented reality. Drum roll.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Okay. Something gets happened. Hello.
This is the participant's view of the previous talk's task. Eyes closed, walking.
Let's try.
So sorry, guys. That's my issue.
No, it's okay. We need to.
This.
There is one.
There it goes. No, I think it's the same issue. Nothing.
Maybe coffee break. I don't know.
Okay, just use my laptop.
Yeah, I mean, what's the bad thing that can happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to say, magic words and then. Okay.
Problem is, it's not sending me any signal from you guys. Hang on one second.
Okay, well, guess what I have in my backpack? I have a ISMAR 2021 shirt that you would have gotten if COVID didn't happen and you came to Italy. Okay? Now, it's a nice little design. It's not that great, but I like it. On the back, however, is a sort of rock and roll concert style history. It's hard to read because it's circular instead of linear, but it does have the locations. So let me give you a little history here. Why not? I have it right in my hand. Okay, so
Let's try.
it's hard to read. It only goes back to 2002. Okay, Darmstadt, 2002. 2003, Tokyo. 2004, Arlington, Virginia, USA. That's close to where I was born, for those of you that are very curious. Vienna, Austria in 2005. 2006, back in the USA at Santa Barbara for all you UCS beef people. 2007, back to Japan, to Nara. 2008, we went to the UK, Cambridge. I can keep going. 2009, Orlando. Some of you all are like, I wasn't even born. Wait, would you have been? No, you would have been, right? Okay, I can do math. 2010, the first time in Korea, in Seoul. 2011, Basel, Switzerland, which I did not get to go to, and I was sad about that.
Every time it plugs
Yeah,
in, it's shutting
Christine, you were there?
shutting
Okay.
down your
Yeah,
laptop.
excellent. 2013, is that where we are? Yes. Australia, for the people that like to take long flights, Adelaide. 2014 to Munich. Yeah, okay, well, now we can have some fun, right? Okay, so after Munich was 2015. And back to Japan. Japan's getting some love in this, okay? I did not make that one either, but I did go to Osaka for IEEE VR, which is incredible. And the next year was Merida, Mexico. Excellent. Okay, I should give out prizes. That one I did go to. That was, and the next one was Nantes, France. Wow. Okay, that's 2017. Anyone remember what happened after Nantes, France? 2018, back to Germany and Munich. Okay, now we're getting closer to recent times here. I expect more participation at this point. I never imagined in a million years that I would be speaking this much in this session. Okay, and I'm not kidding. Okay,
It keeps shutting down.
so then 2019,
Every time I plug
another
it in, it
first-time
shuts down
location.
the
Anyone?
display.
Beijing, boom, you get a cookie. Okay,
Maybe it's replying too much.
2020, another first-time location.
Maybe.
Brazil. Oh, fantastic.
Like when I was trying it.
2021, anyone paying attention?
Now.
Bari, virtual Bari in Gathertown. So sad, Gathertown. Okay. Well, and then that's where we stopped because that's the shirt that we made. Right?
I'm so sorry, guys.
I mean, I can only do this so long, y'all.
I'm trying.
I have other things in my backpack, but this is probably the most apropos. Anyone want to pitch your lab? I am not kidding. I mean, we should do something with this time, right?
It's, no. The problem is I'm getting a signal at my
They
switcher,
put
but
music
I'm
and
not
everybody
getting any.
danced.
It's not sending anything.
Let's go.
I'm
Okay.
serious, it was crazy. It was so good.
Yeah? So people feel like getting up and doing it? In the U.S., that
working-
happened
it's
recently
working-
on the
it's
television, and
recognizing
I had
that
to
it's
turn
not
away.
going through.
How many
It's recognizing
people
that
does it
it's
take to fix the cable? Yeah.
So ISMAR actually started in 2002. In 2001, we organized it with Steve Feiner. It was called ISAR. And then there was a merger between the mixed reality workshops in Japan and IEEE Symposium on Augmented Reality in New York. And that was the start of ISMAR. That's why you have it from 2002. Because ISMAR, the first one was 2000.
And I do remember having the conversation about should we start with the formal name. And is that when the graphic came out as well, the logo? I was trying to, I did a little historical dive on that too, but I don't recall.
To be honest, I don't know.
And it's really interesting if you're into so I said I was into UX, right? So I'm a little bit into UI design. If you look at the treatment of the logo over the years, some folks have kind of gone pretty standard treatment. Others have done some very creative things with the logo. Yes, please.
Should I tell you a funny story? So 2005 in Vienna, I organized it with a guy called Wolfgang Bilkferner. And it was in a beautiful place. But I was responsible I was general chair for Batang. He was local. And then I was in communication with IEEE. And then we went there, and he told us that the dinner would be at the wine house in Vienna. And IEEE sent me an email that as soon as they saw wine house, that they do not pay for alcohol. So I contacted Wolfgang. I told him they will not pay for alcohol. He told me, give me 15, 20 minutes. After that, he called and says, no problem.
Yeah, that's okay.
I didn't understand what happened. Maybe we start. I tell you later. Or maybe I finish it. Anyhow, this is what happens in Vienna. At the conference at ISMAR in Vienna, everybody was drunk. And then 2 weeks later, I was really worried. I got the bill from Wolfgang, from the wine house, and it was written Coca-Cola, 11,000 euro.
Much appreciated. Much appreciated. Okay. Onward and upward. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Francesco, the floor is yours once again.
Third time. Okay. I hope I'm happy to finish also the presentation. Hello, everyone. I am Francesco, and today, on behalf of my co-authors, Ines, Changkun, Uwe, and Sven, I'm happy to engage with you in a conversation about how do we actually identify target information across the mixed reality continuum. This is a joint publication between LMU Munich and the University of Duisburg-Essen. So to set the stage, it's actually important to agree that the success of how a mixed reality application can actually work out is actually how users can actually process information. And here is also important to acknowledge that in mixed reality, we have different layers of physicality and virtuality of the information. And different levels of the mixed reality continuum actually have different perceptual processes that might be involved. So before starting to talk about the experiment and the study, I just wanted to align on some nomenclature. So based on the work of Auda and Gruenefeld, we refer to the different manifestation and mixed reality continuums as actualities. And we refer as an actuality to the current experientiality by the user across the continuum. And it represents where the user is situated and runs from fully physical environment to an entirely virtual one. So let's have a look at how related work actually investigated information processing in mixed reality. So a first study was the one by Van der Over, actually presented at ISMAR 2 years ago. And that actually showed that when searching for information between physical and fully virtual environment, users actually report more workload, similar accuracy, but slower reaction time is actually in VR. Then we moved to ISMAR again in 2022 again. And here, Jin Kim actually explored how users find target information in AR in outdoor environments. And actually here they report that virtual information was actually more salient than physical one, especially in low light conditions. And then David John actually only investigated visual search in VR, but found that it's actually possible to detect exploratory and intent behavior in VR based on Gates' behavioral feature. And lastly, presented last week, Mobile CI, we showed that actually when investigating the entire continuum in a visual search task, we actually found that see-through AR actually negatively impacts the saliency of the relevant information. While in AV and VR, there's actually a benefit in terms of response times and also accuracy. So there is the possibilities that perceptual strategy might actually change when finding relative information across the continuum, depending on if you're interacting with virtual or physical objects. And in fact, both governments showed, and Van der Over showed that actually physical objects, due to their own affordance, actually require more attention and different actually motor response compared to their own virtual counterparts. So based on this work, we actually identified that there is a lack of research that actually investigated how users identify virtual and physical information at the same time. And to investigate this, among the various measures we collected, we have specifically looked for electrophysiological correlates of visual search, and specifically the distractor positivity. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with ERPs, but basically ERPs are variation of our brain potential time locked to a specific event. And in our case, the event that the ERP is time locked is the visual search display onset. And this ERP component, basically it's a sort of measure that how can we actually effectively filter out distracting information and focus on the target one. So it's specifically relevant to visual search. So we then identified 3 research questions. So first, we want to investigate how the different actualities actually impact performance and workload. Then we focused on how the visual search efficiency, as measured by eye tracking feature, actually can be impacted by the physicality of the target and the associated workload. And lastly, as I mentioned before, how actually users are able to effectively suppress distracting information to focus on the target ones. So to answer those 3 research questions, we designed an experiment within subject design, and we asked participants to search for a target object that we presented, and we had a 2x2 design, so they were either looking for the object in AR or in augmented virtuality, and the target was either physical or virtual. We collected EEG data, eye tracking data, behavioral data, and subjective workload scores. So this is how the task looked like. I'm going to show you a video later. But basically, we provided a fixation cross to allow for baselining, both of eye tracking and EEG data. And then we asked participants to look for the object for a maximum of 5 seconds, where we displayed the series of physical and virtual objects. And then we had 1 second of interstimulus interval to allow for basically attentional refresh and avoid fatigue effects. So this is how the environment looked like. So this is the AR physical world environment. So basically we took a 360 4K high quality picture of a room at our institution, very empty, kind of boring, but we tried to basically have a very neutral environment. And you see at the end of the room there is a shelf where we actually placed our physical and virtual objects. So here we placed 25 objects, okay, with 4 possible colors, and 12 were physical, 12 were virtual. And this is how it does look like. So basically, this is the scene displays in the VR headset. So we have a fixation cross here. And then we display the objects in the only 4 central shelves. We ask actually by textual information to look for, in this case, the red parameter to not bias the participants. And here we have the, in this case, physical target. The virtual world is a virtual replica of the physical environment. We balance for brightness of the scene. And here again, we have how the objects are displayed. So basically, we built a shader to preserve the texture and depth cues of the physical objects placed on the shelves, and also maintaining lighting and natural depth from the picture we took for the physical world. And this is how actually the AV visual search scene looks like. So the task is the same. We try to balance all the colors and textures. So here again, looking for a physical target in a yellow cube. And then the next one should be a virtual target. So basically the participant has 5 seconds to identify the target. So let's proceed to talk about the results of our work. So accuracy first. We didn't find any differences in accuracy, so participants were comparably accurate in finding the target across AV and VR, and no difference across targets. But what is the interesting bits are that, for example, for reaction times, participants were actually faster in augmented virtuality compared to AR, especially when they were looking for virtual targets. And when actually the task expires, so basically they needed more than 5 seconds to find the target information, participants were actually more likely to correct identify virtual targets compared to physical ones. For the eye tracking results, we look at saccades, amount of fixation during the search task, and IPA as a measure of workload. So for saccade frequency, actually participants were exploring more fastly the scene in AV compared to AR, especially for visual targets. While for fixation counts, we found that actually they were fixating less in AV, particularly when they were looking for virtual targets. And for IPA, we found actually a main effect of the actuality. So participants were actually experienced less workload in AV compared to AR. And regarding the distractor positivity, so we actually found that there is a smaller amplitude in AV compared to AR, and basically this suggests that there is a more effective distractor suppression in augmented virtuality. So basically users were better able to focus on target when the surrounding environment was actually mostly virtual. And lastly, for workload, we asked at the end of into conditions which was perceived as highly more demanding, and the AR environment seemed to be the one with receiving highly significant more scores of workload. So let's start to understand what actually our results mean. So we found no main effects of accuracy, but reaction times and missed target were actually lower in AV compared to AR. So, and this was actually supported by perceived workload, where actually AV environment were resulting as lower workload. So the idea here is that physical fidelity and visual noise in AR impact the amount of resources and the exploratory behavior. So it's actually harder and more time demanding for users to find the targets. So the idea is that in critical scenarios, we actually have to consider how the visual complexity of the environment actually impacts the capacity of user to find relevant information. So while actually adding more virtuality can actually support faster performances. Then regarding the results on eye tracking, we found that basically participants were actually faster in exploring the AV environment, but and with more slower exploratory behavior in AR. And this was actually supported by the results on IPA for AR that showed actually increased workload in AR. So those results are actually aligned with the guided search theory that basically suggests that simpler, more environments are actually engaging top-down processing and bottom-up processing at the same time, allowing for a more efficient target detection. And this basically means that for we have to basically consider how the virtual visual attributes can actually reduce cognitive load and supports the search efficiency. Next, regarding the distractor suppression in mixed reality, we found that participants were mostly able to suppress distracting information in AV compared to AR. And basically this means that there is a prolonged cognitive effort for participants to manage distractions in AR, resulting in a less efficient visual search process. Therefore, we need to manage and consider the fact that visual noise and sanity in mixed reality can be changing and are needed for increased virtual reality environment. So basically, we need more virtual saliency in AV and mixed reality. So regarding the limitation of our work, our environment was extremely simple. So as we show in the previous presentation, future work should actually investigate more complex, either virtual or AR scenes, so with more visual clutter to identify defects like on the piece of such performance. And then we actually control the luminance of both scenes to avoid confounding effects on the eye tracking behavior, but future work should actually investigate in more realistic scenarios. And this also applies, for example, for the stimuli we deployed in the scene. So we had very basic geometrical shapes, but in our real life, we actually look for objects. So the adding ecological validity to the object that we want to look for is important. And lastly, this was a comment mostly from the reviewers, that like ERPs are actually prone to artifacts when actually moving the head, especially in AR and VR. So the idea is like we have to deal with a lot of motion artifacts, and we need to work more on the motion correction algorithm for this. So I am happy to let you still stay in this session. We investigated target depression across AR and VR environment, and we actually found that augmented virtual environment support is a faster detection of targets. We make our materials, data, and scripts openly available. So if we can talk about it during the conference or later, you can access our material, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, given all that we've been through collectively here, I feel like we owe you at least one question, so I want to leave space for that. Thank you. Name and affiliation, please.
Hi, I'm Yusra from UMass Amherst. Thanks for the great talk. I wanted to ask, like, what is your thesis on, like, why the reaction time is so different between the different virtualities? Is it this because of the correlation between the cognitive load of the extra noise that it has?
Okay, that's a very good question. I believe that virtual objects have like a higher texture simplicity, for example. So even though we render the shadows, we perceive shadows more realistically in physical objects. So they are more simple in a sense, and this also means that when we look in an array of distractors, the relationship between distractors and the target is actually relevant. So they are basically more salient also compared to the virtual distractors and physical distractors. So they are perceptually more salient.
Thank you.
To answer your question.
Okay, let's thank our speaker.
We can start. Hopefully everything will be smoother than the previous session, because I'm not as skillful as Joe to make funny stories. So my name is Hmaiti. I'm from IMT Atlantic in France, and I will be chairing the first session. So if we can start with our first speaker. So Savarish Babu, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. This is collaborative work between my collaborators at National Yangmin Jiao Tong University and myself and my collaborators and students at Clemson University. This was the master's thesis of my student, Vincent Chiu. So we know that accurate perception of size is very important for a variety of situations, such as knowing whether an object actually fits into a particular gap, or knowing how to place objects, and that can be important for a variety of real-life situations, such as in manufacturing, where you have mechanical assembly and electrical circuitry type situations, or in healthcare, in medicine, where you have surgery, simulated surgery, where the perception of size is also important in those kinds of situations. We know from the perception psychology literature that size perception is informed by variable information such as perspective and retinal size. And we also know that more reliably, you also have invariant information such as the texture gradient that is occluded, and also size and shape constancy information that facilitates accurate size perception. And with regards to AR applications, we know that they're used to train users in a variety of real-world perception action tasks. Here's an example from my collaborators at BMW, where they're using AR to essentially train participants in mechanical assembly. And in many of these types of AR applications, the aim is to transfer the skills that involve accurate perception of sizes to tasks, similar tasks in the real world. And when we talk about skills transfer, one of the underlying fundamental theoretical concepts is really perception action calibration, which underlies the skills transfer from one medium to another. And in the past, there's been research in my group, as well as by several others, that has shown that calibration has been shown to successfully carry over perception and action phenomena from one medium, such as VR, to the real world, and vice versa, especially with regards to depth information, such as near or medium field depth perception. So we asked the following research question, which is, to what extent does calibration of size perception in augmented reality carry over to the real world when using two methods of measurements, verbal reports as well as physical judgments? A hallmark of verbal reports is that verbal reports are characterized as perceptual information that is cognitively interpreted, and then there's action that is made, such as the verbal response to the perception of size, and then physical judgments where participants can use body-based judgments, egocentric judgments, to provide size and perception information. So we had two working hypotheses. Participants can successfully attune to size perception information in AR that will successfully carry over to the real world. And then second, we hypothesized that the magnitude of the carryover effects of calibration from AR to the real world is expected to be different depending on the measurement method, that is verbal reports as compared to physical judgments. So let's see our experiment simulation, and I'll talk over the methodology.
We designed an experiment with 3 consecutive phases, including pretest in real-world viewing, calibration in augmented reality, and post-test in real-world again to assess participants' performance of size perception throughout the calibration process. The judgment methods were between subject variables, so each participant would be assigned to either verbal reports or physical judgments as their judgment method. Participants were seated on a chair perceiving the object on a table for several trials, and they were asked to estimate the size of the object verbally or physically using their hands. In both augmented reality and real-world viewing, trackers were attached to the back of the participants' hands. At the beginning of the experiment and after every 3 trials, participants were asked to hold the reference object with their eyes closed for verbal reports. In augmented reality viewing, the participants also wore an optical see-through head-mounted display. This is how it looked in real-world viewing in the pre-test and post-test in our experiment. For verbal reports, after perceiving the target object, the participants were asked to close their eyes and then report the width of the target object in relation to the reference object immediately. As for physical judgment, after perceiving the target object, they used the distance between their palms to judge the width of the object with their eyes closed. In the calibration phase, participants perceive the object through the optical see-through head-mounted display. The participants would do the same estimations as in pre-test and post-test. But this time, after their judgments, they would receive feedback for size calibration. For verbal reports, the participants would see a panel indicating the target object's actual size and the size they just reported. As for physical judgments, participants would see a wireframed object indicating the size of their judgment. In the meantime, they were allowed to adjust their estimation.
So in the augmented reality calibration condition, I want to just remind everyone that the targets were actually virtual or augmented objects that were rendered to the size and scale matching that of the physical counterparts in all the real-world trials. So the measurement method was between subjects, and in the calibration phase, we made sure, in accordance with perception action principles, that participants perceived the target object, and they responded either using verbal reports or physical judgments. Then feedback was provided. Then participants had an opportunity to correct based on the feedback. And in terms of physical judgments, we provided feedback through a wireframe cube, as you saw in the video, that when it matched the exact size of the object, it shone green, and when it did not, it then showed, it was shown rendered as red. Okay, there were 14 participants in either of these conditions based on a power analysis. Let me jump right into the results. We modeled participants' performance using multiple regression techniques, and we found a significant regression equation that stated that perceived size was equal to 1.25 times the phase plus 2.86 times the method, and 0.98 times the target size, and we found an intercept of negative 16 centimeters. And we found this regression model to be highly significant. R squared was very high at 0.82, and all 3 independent variables, method, condition, as well as the target size, were all significant predictors of perceived size, I should say. And when we look at the linear regression profiles across the 3 different phases, pre-test, calibration, and post-test, in the relationship between actual target size and perceived size with regards to verbal reports as well as physical judgments, the pretest phase linear regression profiles are coded in blue, and we can see that they are significantly underestimated as compared to, say, the calibration phase, which was very close to the vertical, which is rendered here as the dotted line. And in the post-test phase, interestingly, we found that participants slightly overestimated the size of the perceived size of the targets in both the verbal reports as well as the physical judgments. We also modeled, using simple linear regression, we modeled each participant's size perception performance in the relationship between actual size and perceived size, and we gathered from each participant their performance slopes, intercepts, and R-squared. And this was subjected to a 3x2 mixed model ANOVA analysis. And we found that this ANOVA analysis of a 3-phase by 2 method mixed model showed a main effect of phase and then an interaction effect of phase by method. And when we looked at it real close, then we could find that in the pretest phase, participants' verbal response where the mean intercept was significantly more erroneous and lower as compared to the physical judgments. And then in both the physical judgments as well as the verbal reports, especially more strongly in the verbal reports, we found that after calibration in AR, participants' performance improved such that the intercepts were closer to 0. And then in the post-test, we see that the intercepts are slightly positive or showing a little bit of overestimation. When looking at accuracy, we looked at the signed error, which is perceived size minus actual size. We did an analysis where we compared and contrasted the pretest versus the post-test signed error between the verbal and physical judgment methods within each of the trials to look for any calibration effects from one trial to the next. That ANOVA analysis did not reveal any significant effects. But then when we looked at the method by trials, within the calibration phase only, we found that there was a significant interaction effect between method by trials. When we looked at the signed error between the two different methods, verbal and physical judgments, we find that at least initially, in the first 4 or 5 trials, participants are much more erroneous in the verbal judgments as compared to the physical judgments, but they then rapidly start to calibrate, and their accuracy tends to be much closer to the residual error of 0. Finally, we also looked at the workload, and we find that we measured workload right after the pretest, and then we measured workload right after calibration and post-test. Post-test was done immediately after calibration, or to preserve the calibration effect. So right after post-test, when we conducted the NASA TLX workload assessment, we found that both in terms of temporal demand as well as frustration, the verbal reports method showed significantly higher demand as compared to the physical judgments. And right after the post-calibration and post-test, we find that participants in verbal reports showed that the temporal demand was significantly higher as compared to physical judgments. So what does all of this mean? Taking all of this together, we find that utilizing perception action calibration in AR, participants' size perception improved from pre-test to post-test in the real world. We find that participants' responses overall are highly consistent, and the intercepts in pre-test was significantly more erroneous and lower as compared to the intercepts in the post-test in our regression models supporting hypothesis 1. And we find that the magnitude of the errors in the pre-test in the verbal reports was significantly higher as compared to the physical judgments. However, errors in the post-test using both methods arose to about the same levels. And so we find evidence that calibration is effective unequivocally regardless of the method. So although verbal reports were more erroneous to begin with than physical judgments, calibration in AR seems to work. And it seems to improve verbal and physical judgments in the real world, showing support for hypothesis 2. Finally, just impact limitations in future work, real quick. Training in AR with calibrative feedback and correction can be harnessed to enhance and size perception, and that information transfers from the AR to the real world, as we have shown. One limitation of our finding is that the effects of calibration of the transfer of perceptual size information was investigated in optical see-through augmented reality and not in video see-through augmented reality. So that aspect remains as future work. And also in future work, we are interested in investigating whether perceptual calibration transfers of size information transfers between different types of media, such as VR to the real world, VR to AR, and then video see-through augmented reality to the real world. With that, I want to thank you all for listening to my talk. I'll be happy to entertain any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any question?
Janine?
Thanks, Saab, for that great talk. I love the work. I'm wondering if I saw that you gave different types of feedback for the verbal reports and the physical judgments. I'm wondering what you think about if you gave people in the verbal report condition, because that showed the biggest difference at the pretest, right? The action-based feedback, the physical feedback, do you think they would also recalibrate in that condition if you gave the feedback from the other?
That's very interesting. I wish Chris Pagano was here, and my ecological perceptual psychology colleague would say that you need to have task-relevant information that calibrates each type of action-based response separately, and he would cite many resources that support that notion, that it does transfer. So I've always wanted to conduct a similar study where between measurement methods, if you were to calibrate one measurement method, but does it transfer to the other? I think it would still partially transfer because the information that you're perceiving is still the same. Just how you are interpreting and then acting based on that information is different. So one half of that perception action, coupling is still the same. So I believe that it could potentially transfer over to some extent.
The question? Okay, so thanks our speaker again.
Thank you.
Stick around for the wetness illusion from UT Dallas, Yatharth. When you're ready, the floor is all yours.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Yatharth Singhal from the University of Texas at Dallas, and today I will be presenting our work, Wetness Illusion in Midair. This work was done in collaboration with my colleagues Daniel Honrales, Professor Hsin-Ni from Kyushu University, and my advisor, Dr. Jin Ryongkim. Humans constantly perceive a wide range of sensations when interacting with the environment. We perceive touch when interacting with our surroundings or even with each other. We detect changes in temperature when touching a hot or cold object. In addition to this, we also feel wetness when putting our hand through running water. All these senses are usually perceived because of specialized receptors present in our skin. For example, we use mechanoreceptors to pick up touch input, hot or cold thermoreceptors to get thermal information. However, when it comes to wetness, there are no dedicated receptors present in our skin to perceive wetness. So how are humans able to perceive wetness despite the absence of wet receptors? Previous studies have suggested that the wetness sensations are perceived by a combination of thermal and tactile sensations. While this is very interesting, it also means that it is possible to invoke artificial wetness sensations by combining these modalities together. As VR systems are becoming more and more engaging with increased focus on integrating multiple modalities, incorporating wetness feedback becomes crucial for immersive applications. Existing methods for providing wet feedback in VR often involve directly applying moisture to user skin when they interact with virtually wet objects. But these systems tend to be bulkier and often require a complex hardware setup. Another approach is to create the illusion of wetness by combining thermal and tactile feedback. This involves using devices that provide both temperature changes and touch sensations on the skin at the same time. Although this method is still underexplored, a few attempts have been made, mostly focusing on using cold sensation to simulate wetness. But wearing a device isn't always ideal because it can restrict users' ability to freely interact with virtual objects, limiting natural movements in VR. So what if we could elicit wet sensations by utilizing a non-contact method? Introducing our work, Wetness Illusion in Midair. This approach combines thermal and tactile modalities in midair, so thereby freeing users' hands or the body parts so that they can interact with virtual objects. So to study this approach, we utilized a hexagonal-shaped chamber with open top to provide combined thermal and tactile sensations in midair. This chamber consists of two heating modules on the side, consisting of a ceramic heating element and fans. The ceramic heaters are responsible for providing heat sensations, while the wind from the fan is used as tactile source. It has an open top area in which people can perceive integrated thermal and tactile feedback together. We conducted 2 user studies to verify our approach and study different factors that affect perception of wetness. In the first study, we investigate whether illusory wet sensations can be created by thermal and tactile integration. We also look at different factors that influence this illusion and to see which one has the biggest impact. We conducted a study with 16 participants focusing on 3 key factors: temperature, pressure, and visual feedback. We tested 3 temperature levels: high, which was 44 degrees Celsius, low, 38 degrees Celsius, and no temperature, which was basically room temperature at 23 degrees Celsius. Similarly, we tested 3 pressure levels: high, low, and no pressure. The pressure was controlled by changing the speed of the fan. So essentially, we were just changing the RPM to change pressure. Finally, we also studied the effect of visual feedback. For this, we created 2 visual scenes: campfire and steam. The campfire scenario invoked little to no wetness expectation, whereas steam scenario provided expectations of wetness when users interacted with it. For each trial, participants interacted with the setup for 10 seconds and then rated their wetness perception on a scale of 0 to 3. 0 meaning no wetness perception at all, and 3 highlighting clear wetness perception. The results showed a direct correlation between warmth and the probability of wetness perception, with higher temperatures leading to greater probability of perceiving wetness illusion. While no clear differences between low and high pressure conditions were observed, they were both found to elicit better wet sensations than the no pressure condition. We also observed that participants rated wetness sensation to be clearer when interacting with steam scene as compared to campfire scenario. This was extremely interesting as this highlighted a possible connection between visual context and wetness sensations. So our previous study revealed a significant effect of visual congruency on wetness illusion. In this study, we dive deep into understanding the effects of these visual factors on wetness perception. We designed two different scenes, a water fountain scene and a sink scene, and we also varied the visual wetness amount in each scene. In fountain scenario, participants could interact with hot water hitting the inside of the palm. As we changed the amount of water or the width of the stream would increase. In the sink scene, participants could dip their hands into the water, feeling it on both sides of their hand. With a small amount of water, they could only partially submerge their hand, but with larger amount, they were able to fully submerge their hand inside the water. The overall procedure for the study was similar to the previous one. So they interacted with the system for 10 seconds, and after that rated their wetness sensations on a scale of 0 to 3. We observed that participants felt a clear wetness illusion when interacting with sink condition. Seeing their hands covered with water from both sides gave them perception of clear wetness illusion. It was also observed that wetness illusion was more frequent with high visual amount for both the scenes, thus highlighting that visual congruence plays a significant role in wetness illusion. So since we went through 2 studies and a lot of results, so in order to simplify our key findings, here are some key takeaways from this research. We demonstrated the potential of illusion-based mid-air wetness feedback. Usually, feeling wet involves direct contact with moisture or a surface. However, we show that using thermal cues through airflow combined with appropriate visuals can create the sensation of wetness without any physical contact. Historically, research on wetness perception focused mainly on cold sensations, linking wetness to skin's heat loss. Warm sensations were seen as secondary or thought to weaken or even block the feeling of wetness. However, our research shows that warm sensations, when combined with pressure, can effectively create a sense of wetness. We found a strong positive correlation between temperature and perceived wetness, suggesting that higher temperature enhanced the feeling of wetness. We found that pressure is a crucial factor in wetness perception. Our method of applying pressure in midair shows a positive relationship with how wet participants feel, suggesting that high pressure levels increase both wetness ratings and likelihood of experiencing wetness. We propose that matching visual stimuli is essential for enhancing the sensation of wetness. When visual cues align with typical wetness experiences like steam, people tend to rate their perceived wetness higher than in situations with conflicting visuals, such as the campfire. We further demonstrated how visual cues influence wet perception and found that contextual information from visual environment affect how wetness is perceived. Generally, conditions with more visible wetness, such as higher liquid volume or greater hand submersion, were perceived as having clear wetness. Finally, the interaction between thermal and tactile cues is crucial for wet perception. However, the likelihood of perceiving wetness approached almost 100% with high thermal levels, steam visuals, and some pressure. This indicates that combining these sensory inputs allows for reliable wet simulation without direct touch or cold sensations. That was all for my talk. Thank you for being patient and listening to my talk. And I once again would like to thank all my co-authors, and please feel free to ask any questions.
Okay. Interesting talk. Thank you. I have a question in the back.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I have a question. Have you also looked into galvanic skin response? Because you basically said if you have higher temperature, you also have like a higher tendency to have the wetness illusion. But do you maybe think that has something to do with the amount of sweat that you produce with higher temperatures?
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. We specifically paid attention to this. So therefore, in our study design, the participants only interacted with the system for 10 seconds at a time. And we made sure that this time is not enough for them to have sweat on their hands.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, yes. You guys are making me work here.
Thank you for presentation. I wonder if wetness illusion in midwear occur in the absence of visual cues or guidance.
Can you please repeat your question?
The wetness illusion occur in the absence of the visual cues or visual guidance.
That's a great question. So we tested and we couldn't find any reliable evidence of people perceiving wet feedback without visual cues. However, we also tested only visual cues and no thermal and pressure, and we couldn't find any reliable evidence of people perceiving wetness there as well. So it's highly important that it's a multimodal interaction of all these modalities combined together for people to feel wetness reliably and clearly. Yeah.
Last call. Okay. I see a lot of people that have stayed. You guys have all stayed. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure the speakers do too. So thank you. And let's give all of our speakers a big round.
Thank you.
Okay. We now invite you to have your own wetness illusion experience through the coffee break or water of your choice. Thank you all, and I'll see you around.